Welcome back to our growing experiment. We're here with Carrie from Sudbury Shared Harvest. That's an organization with a mission to cultivate community health by connecting people and food. So, Carrie, can you tell us a little bit about the organization, how it got started?
Well, it actually, I'm sort of the person who started it. I say sort of because some other people helped me get it started by joining the initial board, because we are a nonprofit organization and actually now a registered charity. But it all started almost 10 years ago, actually, in the fall of 2013, more as the idea of a food rescue organization. If people are familiar with organizations in other cities, or maybe they heard of Fruit for All when it was Fruit for All. So the idea was to collect fruit and vegetables at times. It sort of started mostly as fruit, but from when people had too much in their backyard or around their property, and to redistribute it to different food organizations, community food programs that use, that make meals for, people without homes, etc. And so it started as that and kind of evolved into focusing on food forests mainly, and kind of teaching people how to grow food and so on. Um, I could go on and on, but I don't know if there's specific things you'd rather hear about. You can can
Maybe
lead
tell
the
us a
way.
little bit about what a food forest is.
Sure. So yeah, a food forest, or sometimes we call them edible forest gardens too, and the terms are interchangeable. The reason we started using edible forest gardens was we started out thinking that we might, plant this, what is quite a large one to start with, at Delkidozi, which is about 8,000 square feet. But maybe that we would eventually expand on it over the years. And then because of the feedback we got from people sort of wanting, well, I want one in my neighborhood, like, why can't we do another one, somewhere else? We sort of switched to focusing on, instead of making that one bigger, on making establishing a series of smaller food forests or edible forest gardens. So that's why, as I say, that we kind of started using the term edible forest garden, because I think food forest made people think that it was going to be this giant forest. And really, the forest in the word, either edible forest garden or food forest, it's not really that it's going to ever end up looking like a forest. It's more about how ecologically it acts like a forest, in that the plants are sort of helping each other out, and we're not tending to it like you would a regular garden. I mean, we do some weeding and we do some maintenance, but if it wasn't for the fact that they're in city parks and schools, you could really just leave it to maintain itself. We do it mainly, the maintenance is mainly to keep the city happy, so that will allow us to keep planting these so that it still looks tidy-ish. Although, it's not a manicured garden by any means. But so the idea is of a food forest is really to have perennial plants. So we're not replanting anything. We're not digging anything. We actually use like a lasagna gardening method to start with, where we could start with a lawn or whatever we have, but generally it's just lawn area. And then, planting things within that ground, and then, covering the areas around with cardboard, and then layering on some, garden soil or compost, and then mulch on top of that, and planting other things within those layers. But so it's kind of a long way of not really explaining everything about food forests, but maybe just giving the basic idea of what it is.
Okay. And so when you start setting up your food forest, now that you've been sort of doing this a while and you've been doing it in different places, are there food forest cornerstones, like plants that you sort of
What do you
rely
mean
on or
by
use
that?
lots. Sorry.
Oh, yes,
Yeah, the plants.
absolutely. Yeah, I wasn't
Yeah,
familiar with that term.
yeah. I just
Yes, definitely. We actually, so the first one when we started, are you hearing all that background noise? There's some construction going on outside. I'm sorry if you can hear
Nope,
yep.
that,
it's
but
all good on our end.
um, oh, good. I can hear it a lot, but that's fine. I will ignore it. When we first started with Delki Dozy, we actually did pretty much was it over a year? About a year of planning went into before we put anything in the ground. And we had a committee of people that had different backgrounds, all having some experience with gardening, either with specifically with fruit trees, with just having planted a lot of native plants locally here. Some were just gardeners who wanted to get more into different kind of gardening, but had been doing lots of gardening for, even if it was just flowers and so on in the past. And so they actually, I wasn't on that committee. I was kind of like more of the overall organizer of kind of making the whole thing happen. But specifically to do with the plants, they met pretty regularly. I don't know if I can't remember exactly, but throughout an entire winter. So what we did was we had I got a grant to hire what she called herself a design coach. Her name's Bonita Ford, and she's in Perth, Ontario. And she had already had quite a bit of experience with food forests. I really had none, actually. And to be honest, like, I kind of ended up, it's sort of funny that I'm doing this now because really I'm actually not very good at growing things myself. I like to say I failed rhubarb 3 times, which is absolutely the truth. A whole other story you probably don't need to hear about. But so I've been really learning as we go along. As far as I said before, we started as a fruit rescue organization, and I was more about, I had managed nonprofit projects for already quite a few years at that point, and that I know how to get grants and how to make all the pieces come together and get people together and recruit volunteers and all these things. But actually growing things was not really something I knew a lot about. So my first step was, let's get a grant to bring in someone who really knows what they're doing. I just heard about food forests elsewhere, and I thought, why can't we do that in Sudbury? That's such a great thing. I want that to happen here. And that, coupled with some things with the Fruit for All program that were making it difficult, it sort of made sense to go in that direction. And so Bonita really led us through this whole process. So she came in the fall of 2016 and did a workshop where she taught us kind of all about food forests. And then we actually planted like a little tiny mini trial run, which was like a sort of a 10 by 10 area around an apple tree that existed in one of the community gardens in the city that we had planted as part of another project a couple of years earlier. So we did the workshop, and those people were really interested, and some of them were involved in the committee that kind of spent this entire winter really researching different plants and what would grow here, how could we try to have as many native species as possible, but also wanting to have edible perennial species. And they started out with a really long list of, I think there was about 300 possible plants. And then the 6 or 7 people spent time, sort of debating different things. And, Bonita knew about many of the plants, but also there were some people who knew more about the local climate here. Since she's in Perth, it's different. And so, they kind of went back and forth and narrowed it down eventually to about 40, which is the original approximately how many different species were planted at Delki Dozy. Since then, we've kind of added a few wildflowers, and some things didn't survive. And so I'm not sure if that's the exact number anymore, but we kind of tend to use that list. And actually, it's on our website. we have a sort of a little guide that just has a little few sentences about each plant and why we chose it, because some of them are not edible. And, so some of them it was, because they maybe attract pollinators, or maybe they also, or possibly are a nitrogen fixer. So, so that's kind of the basic guide we'll use for the, and some like all of the other gardens since then are anywhere from much to much smaller. So the other ones range from, like I said, the other Delkie Dozy one's about 8,000 square feet. The smallest one is about 250 square feet. It's really just a few fruit trees with, some other plants around it. Some fruit trees that had been planted again from this much earlier project where we just planted some fruit trees before we got started with food forests. So, and then so there's the 250 smallest one, and then they range up to about 1,500, maybe 2,000 square feet. Some of the smaller ones that were planted after Delkie Dozy. So, so there wouldn't be as wide a variety of plants in all of them. Delkie Dozy probably has the full 40, but we do use that. Yes, it's a useful guideline because all of them are things that grow here easily. We've never watered again after the first season. So of course watering while the plants are young. But even through some pretty bad drought situations we've had for many weeks of no rain, they're all plants that can really take quite a bit of dryness and heat in the summer.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Because ideally that's what you want. If you want to have a place where you want to maximize the amount of things that are growing, it's kind of cool, the idea of turning it into a food forest where all the stuff that's growing there can also provide food. So being that there's a range and size of the different like food forests that you guys are doing, what kind of sort of harvest do you guys get from that, or how does the production end of it go? Like how does that all work out?
Well, we're only really just in the last couple of years starting to get some decent amount of food at Delkie Dozy. So Delkie, we planted the first phase, about half of the size, in 2017, the spring. So yeah, I guess we're going on 6 years coming up. And then the next spring we planted a second phase. And then the other ones, there were some in 2019 and sort of every year afterwards. But if just talking about Delkie Dozy for a minute is the most developed from that point of view. We tend to get so first I guess I should say that it's really different from a lot of the other people you probably will talk to on your podcast who are more thinking about, producing for selling or even for themselves, but trying to, feed themselves. Although we would love for this to contribute to, people being able to feed themselves, really the educational aspect of it is really the most important thing that we don't expect that we're ever going to produce enough food to sort of make a dent in, food security in Sudbury. From that point of view, it's more of an indirect way of so many people are interested in this, and, people will come out to work bee and just, show them around and show them a few plants and they'll ask about things. And for people to be able to take that knowledge home and say, wow, yeah, because sometimes when we started this, I used to get people surprised that we could grow some of these things in Sudbury. I mean, I was certainly surprised to find out less than 10 years ago that you could grow cherries in Sudbury. I mean, not the same type that you get in the grocery store, but cherries that are delicious and are cherries, and lots of things like that. I mean, a lot of people have never heard of Haskaps. I certainly hadn't, again, until less than 10 years ago. And so all of these things, or like currants, I was like, oh, I think currants, aren't those little things that in Britain they they put in like buns and stuff. And I just never thought, oh yeah, like you could grow currants in Sudbury, and there were already people growing currants in Sudbury. So just spreading that knowledge itself of what you can grow. Also having workshops where, we'll have people, I don't know if you guys have know of Ron Lewis, but he, for many years, ran a business called Lewis's Hardy Fruit Trees. He sold it a few years ago, and it's now called Beautiful Field Farm and Fruit. I might have that
Beautiful
wrong,
Field
but something
Farm.
like that. Yes, and but Ron had been growing fruit trees in just outside of Sudbury, Naughton, for I don't know, as a hobby, but then got into made this small seasonal business for himself. But for 40 years now. And so even when we started 10 years ago, he'd already been doing this for over 30 years. And so, we really leaned on him. He was on that committee and also involved, has been involved all along. And he gives us advice all the time and does workshops where he teaches people about the different things we can grow and how to prune fruit trees and all these types of things, and just building that knowledge in the community so that there's more people that are able to, to grow things and also to spread that knowledge to other people. So that's a really huge focus of the whole thing, is that educational aspect, for sure.
Well, and that's that's really good too. Now that I kind of get that, I like that idea, because it's you're sort of putting out sort of similar principles to what we sort of do when we built our garden. We wanted to use a lot of things that were perennial. We wanted to do as little maintenance as possible. We had an eye towards stuff that was more native to the area because of those first two things we mentioned, and also just for the variety and the sort of just they would do well here and all that kind of stuff. And that's great to see that's what you're doing, because for a lot of people, they don't really see it, right? And you're putting it in action, building the place. You're like, yeah, come here and come check it out. We can show you how this kind of works. And so that's good, because the real difference to be made is when people start taking this into their own backyards, really. And then that's just that one apple tree. If they get that out of going and seeing what you got there, or if they get a currant bush, if they're just doing any kind of little thing like that, that little thing will help that individual with their food security or their family.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we have started to get more fruit. And I mean, some of the, all of the gardens, one that we planted just in June, we had quite a few strawberries in there. We do the day neutral strawberries. So they really produce, sort of they would produce a small crop in June anyway, and a bigger crop later in the season. And in September, and actually into October, because of the long fall we had, if you remember, I don't know if you remember that, but it was, we had a really long fall. There was lots of strawberries from, I believe, 20 strawberry plants initially, sort of dotted throughout in between all the other stuff. And, kids in this park where we planted it were just, excited about these strawberries. And that was just 3 months in, so there are exciting things like that happen. The currants at Delki Dozy, for example, have just done super well from not day one, but year one, a year after they were planted that first spring, or June, I guess it is around June or so, July, I guess, when the currants happen. We had lots of them already in that first year. And then every year the currants have just really done well, to where this year I put it on Facebook about 3 times. Hey, come pick the currants. There's still more. And people were picking them, and somebody was posting that she'd made jam and stuff out of them. And it was still there's still more. Come pick them. So it depends. And there actually this year were a lot of apples, but in previous years, we have had a lot of insect issues, and we've been trying to deal with that, in natural ways. But also, sometimes I don't know whether it's, a flock of birds that come in and just took them all, or someone came and picked them all before they were ready. But because I was there at least once a week this past summer, and I was there one week and there was lots of apples, and the next week they would not have been ready yet because they weren't ready. It was August, but they were not ready, and they were just all gone. So I don't know if somebody picked them all, not realizing until they picked them all that they weren't actually ready, or it's hard to say. And so things like that happen too. Like, that's the way it works, because it is out there for anybody to pick, and there's no rules. We love people to get involved in helping maintain it, but there's no rule that you can't have any fruit if you don't participate. So it's a bit of a crapshoot, for sure.
Yeah, and you're going to get that a little bit, right? But like you said, too, it's the real key of that is the educational part, right? You're really showing people, and hey, if someone has learned something there, that this place here has an apple tree that produces lots of apples, or if it wasn't them that learned that, it was a flock of birds. And I mean, that's all kind of part
Yeah.
of the whole circle of the whole food chain anyway. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing there too, and so you mentioned that you're involved in a lot of non-for-profit, or that what you're doing is a not-for-profit. So, like, sort of, what is that like structurally? How does that work, and that kind of thing?
Right. So, like a nonprofit organization, I mean, really anybody can set up a nonprofit organization, but you start with a founding board of directors, which has to be a minimum of 3 people. But there is a fair bit of paperwork that goes into sort of registering. I mean, the initial registration isn't that big a deal, but each year you have to make sure to keep up on that. Becoming a registered charity is kind of like a whole other level, but is another level of paperwork and maintenance, and even more rules about how you can do things so that you can maintain your charitable status. And so being a nonprofit does allow you then to apply for grants that are for nonprofits, because like, as a nonprofit, we don't have to spend every cent that comes in that particular year. We are allowed a certain percentage of our overall budget to be saved for like a rainy day type of thing for the next year, or coming years. But you can't be like, it's different from a profitable corporation, in that, a profitable corporation would either have shareholders that the profits would be divided amongst, or a owner who could just take the profit at any time and have that be taken as profit. So I don't know if I'm explaining this that well, but yeah, the purpose has to be for something that's like a community purpose. And so, yeah, like when we set up our initial nonprofit, we have to put that the purposes are, I don't know the purposes offhand, but they're like community minded purposes, basically.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I guess you have your idea, you have your initial founding board, and you decide that you're going to create this group, right? Your nonprofit group. And you go and you start doing that, and you start applying for grants and stuff like that. And so a lot of the members who started this board, they must be also doing some other job on top of that, as well as getting together and working together on this project.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. At the moment, I'm the only paid staff person. The board, like, I'm not a board member, because a board member really shouldn't be a paid staff person. I think there's some rule that you could be partly or something, but it's better really just for a paid staff person not to be a board member. And the board, yes, all the board members have other jobs, they just have interest in, helping make this continue to thrive as an organization. And so, so some of the grants, part of my job is getting grants to do all the things, including the plants and we have summer staff. We usually have some summer students. We get Canada Summer Jobs grants to do that. But like some of the grants have to be partly to pay me to maintain all the things, the administrative work that has to be done. And that gets more and more complicated as as you go on, although it depends. For a few years we had other staff, and that did make the administrative work get bigger. I mean, in the beginning, when we started out, like I do that, but I'm also, comes time to start planting things, like organizing events and actually being out there planting stuff with people and going out to work bees and showing people around and seeing what we need to do that week. And so my job is like a combination of sort of like the administrative end of things and the actually getting out and doing stuff. And now that, like, for this year, we won't have any other staff other than some summer students who are just sort of temporary. We only can get like 8-week positions. So this year I'll be doing a lot of that again, just the being out there and, kind of organizing things and meeting with people and all of that.
Well, it sounds like you also get a lot of volunteers, so that's really nice to kind of keep it moving forward, right? Because it is something that you want to be a community thing. So having community out there really lets things move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the volunteers are super important, and a lot of that is to working with other groups like, the Community Garden Network and the Food Policy Council and different other organizations that exist to sort of network around volunteers, finding people that are interested in the same kinds of things. And because, of course, volunteers are amazing, but often people don't want to do the organizing part of it. They don't necessarily want to be the one that, okay, we're going to meet every week at this time, and then this is what's going to need to be done. They just kind of want to show up and be like, I can do whatever you need. So even organizing volunteers is kind of a job in itself, or part of a job anyway.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if you want a project that you have to do, there has to be some sort of structure in place to actually get the thing done, right? And that sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. You're like, all right, this is the thing we're trying to do. We're trying to go and educate people. We're trying to do it by this way. And this is what we're going to need in way of volunteers to get this done. This is what we're going to need in way of grants to get this done. This is the project we're looking at. And I guess that's probably where you're working with the board and they're saying, oh, we have this kind of an idea for a project or this sort of a thing, or this is what we want to do going forward.
Well, it's really great too that you do get some summer students, because I think it is important to get young people involved in this kind of thing too.
Yeah, for sure. Canada Summer Jobs is amazing. Like I say, it's unfortunate that they only tend to give like 8-week positions, because it would be great to be able to have, university or college students that have a longer summer. But just the program is excellent. Like, and a lot of time, I feel like we give students a really great experience too. It's not just a job. Like, I don't think we've had a student yet who didn't love their job. It was, it's a fun thing to do, but you're also learning, and so it can be really great experience for other things as well.
Yeah, I'm sure they see it as very rewarding to, like, starting out seeing it like as a seed, and then as time goes by seeing the fruit. That's probably pretty rewarding for them.
Yeah, I think in general it's rewarding for volunteers too. Like, see some people who come back year after year and sort of seeing it kind of develop. And
Now, I believe you also take this education component to the schools. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we did really do a lot of that in the last couple of years. I did actually have we had two other staff people for about the last 2 or 3 years. We had like first as interns, and then we were able to keep them for with some other grants. And but they were also doing like a whole program that is not going to happen anymore in the summer, that was all about growing actually annual vegetables at École Secondaire Hanmer. So more of like an urban farm type of project. And so that it was just, I think we bit off too much. I should say I probably bit off more than I could chew there. Kind of a series of circumstances that led us in that direction. And it really was a bit too far out of what we were started out doing. And it just it's just too hard to maintain financially, really, to be honest. And so a lot of that was, we were actually able to reach a lot of schools through having obviously two more people for a couple of years. And they did some amazing work, in schools, developing some programming that kind of connects directly with curriculum. Some of it connected with the farm, but also some of it specifically connected with the edible forest gardens. And I mean, we will be continuing to do some of that. We just probably won't be able to do as much of it as we were able to do in the last couple of years. As far as I think last year, I think we reached, and it might have been like 600 students altogether. And we just won't be able to kind of reach those numbers, but the intention is still to do, like, working with schools is fantastic. It's the teachers love it. The kids love it. They're learning something, but they're also, getting to actually do something with their hands. And so, because the activities that we have are like, there will be some classroom activities, but there's also like getting out and, actually planting things or doing things in the gardens. And so that's something, we will definitely be trying. Like, I've been, during this winter, been applying for various grants, and depending on what all we can manage to get. And in the next couple of years, we'll kind of be aiming to sort of build that back up, but to doing, as much work with schools as possible.
Yeah, it's great to hear that there's that interest there, because that's where it all really starts, right? That's why education is such a key thing, because it really is shaping what the next generation is going to have as what it's trying to accomplish, or what it's trying to do, or how it's going to go about doing that. And especially when you want to talk about food security, having these real practical skills that you're offering, that's exactly what you want to have. And furthermore, I mean, of course, the kids love it, because I think at the end of the day, they would like to be outside rather than inside, right? And I mean, along that same line of thinking, like the way the system of school works in a way is kind of like, it's designed for like when you're working later on. It kind of gives you a routine kind of thing. It's sort of set up for like your job kind of thing. And it's not set up for like, gardening food and all that kind of stuff, which was sort of an older way of being, but it's coming back now because people are starting to ask questions now that they're well educated. Where's the food come from? How did it get here? What are the actual resources that went into making this? And how much responsibility, or how much impact do I have on my own food choices?
Exactly. And I think like there is really we're noticing a lot of interest in this area, right? We never put any advertising out to schools or anything. It all kind of came through word of mouth. Like, I had a couple of teacher friends who started some things a few years ago with them just to kind of try it out. We don't really have too much time because this season is so short, and we already have all these other activities where we're trying to plant things and so on. So just do a little bit here, and it was, it was really well received. And then, someone at the school, another teacher, heard about it, and, kind of it's all been sort of, basically through word of mouth, through teachers and students and so on, that it got to the point where, we were pretty, like last year, we were really at maximum capacity. We really couldn't, as it is, we probably said yes to a couple of things too many. And that's always an issue, is like trying to balance, we want to do everything. And every teacher that sends me a message and says, oh, I want you to come to the school, like, I wish we could do everything. We just can't necessarily always, can't just time-wise, reach everybody. But hopefully we'll be able to build that up as much as possible in the next few years.
Yeah, I would hope that too, just because even when me and Jordan started talking about how we could really have people see or think more about where their food comes from and everything, we're like, well, if you start with kids in the schools, that's a good way to do it. So when I heard that you were doing it, I'm like, that's great. And by everybody kind of reaching out, it almost seems evident that should almost be part of the curriculum anyway, right? Kids should be learning that in school.
Absolutely.
But like Jordan said, the curriculum isn't really showing that.
Yeah, we were sort of finding places in the curriculum to, it wasn't necessarily specifically about food security, it would be like, grades such and such, biology, okay, well, they talk about, how plants interact or something. And so we would take that piece that, and say, okay, well, we could, because especially for high school, it's not, a lot of the elementary school teachers are happy just to have you do an activity, and they think of it more of as a field trip, and they aren't as concerned about fitting into the curriculum. But as the kids get older, of course, and they need to fit everything into their school year, they really appreciate it, where you can say, well, this is in your unit X, and we can have this activity, and here's like a quiz you can use that will sort of, fulfill that. And so that really helps for sure.
But I'm just thinking now, like, if you wanted to say fit that in with like biology, I mean, or even say chemistry, right? Like, plant is kind of a good thing for that in a lot of ways, because it is dealing with a lot of those different things. It's biology, of course, because it is a living thing. Chemistry, of course, because most biological things have a series of chemical reactions going on in them that are a part of different processes. They're respiratory processes or circulatory processes or whatever the case might be. And there's a whole bunch of ways you can go about that and tie that into things. So, and the other thing I like about learning about gardening and stuff and food is, because it's such a foundational base level thing, it does sort of hyperlink to all these other things that we can then further develop into specialized fields, like a person who becomes a biologist or a chemist or whatever the case might be. But that practical working with something that you can see and develop right there, that's kind of one of the best ways to do it. And it's putting the theory into practice. And especially nowadays too, with the amount of attention we're paying to sort of how our energy and stuff like that. Like, we're really focused on that. And so, I mean, when you want to focus your energy, you're kind of killing two birds at one stone, where you could even say maybe have classes that are working on growing food as part of a project. Like, say one of your credits is like, all right, we're planting, because you got to think, I don't know how long a semester is in high school. Is it long enough to grow, like, say, a tomato plant? You need 75 days for a tomato plant, roughly, right? I think that's probably after 2 weeks of germination, let's say, for your seeds. Say you get like between 7 and 21 days for your germination.
Yeah, you would definitely be able to, but the season and stuff, you need like a greenhouse at the school.
Yeah, you'd have to do lights or whatever, but I mean, it'd be kind of a cool project to do in a way, and then you could do it into growing all different other kind of plants, and then it could also be a study in like engineering, because if, say, you're doing a hydroponics setup and you're doing lighting and stuff like that, you could tie in an electrician component, you could tie in like a sort of millwright mechanic type component, because you're, say, dealing with like pumps and stuff like that. So that's a base level of hydraulics and stuff like that. Like, there's a bunch of stuff you can tie in, because it ties the shop class into the biology class.
Yeah, it's probably more the funding that
of course.
Carrie was talking about, right? That's probably
Well, actually, you know what? We actually have a really neat project coming up. It's it was supposed to happen last year. We got a grant, I guess we got it, I don't know, over a year ago now, because it was supposed to be, the project was supposed to happen this coming year last year at LaSalle Secondary. So there's a teacher there named Ray Gorzinski, and I had met him actually many years ago through something else, but a few years back, probably the second year or so after we planted the Delki Dozy food forest, he had heard about it on the news or something and got in touch and said he teaches a sort of an experiential education program called the Nagansuin program, and it's specifically for Indigenous high school kids who either dropped out and came back or risk of dropping out and really are not fitting into the kind of regular school system very well. And it's completely experiential education. So he goes out into the community and they do various kinds of things, and as their learning experiences to kind of get their high school credit. So they're just reaching the curriculum in different ways. And one of the things he had gotten really interested in was actually growing hydroponically. And they had he has what he calls his living lab, his classroom at LaSalle that is all, and they built it really low budget from, plumbing parts. And he did lots of research with the students over the many years, because now, he's been doing this for about 5 or 6 years, I think, the program, or 7 years even that the program's been going. So they have this kind of, and with, lights and everything and so they're able to grow stuff pretty much year round, except that in the summer they're not there in July and August. But it's quite small. It's in a classroom. And so he had always dreamed of a greenhouse and he like a solar geothermal greenhouse specifically. They had done all this research and this is what they wanted to do. And now maybe 5 years ago, they had actually tried to get a grant. This is before he had come to the food forest with the students. And so because he came and brought them and we did a little tour and talked about it and all of that. But he had been trying to get this grant to try to build this greenhouse. And, I think he tried for a couple of years and they didn't get it. And I think he just sort of gave up on it. I mean, he's a teacher full time. He doesn't really have time to be dealing with all this grant stuff. It was a thing they were hoping for, but he just sort of didn't pursue it further. So then a few years ago, or I don't know, I guess it's going on, but a couple of years ago, I had seen this grant opportunity with PV Industries, and worked together, working with him. It was actually a video application. We did a video application, and with him talking about the classroom they have and what they'd like to do. And I'm making a long story long, but we actually got the grant and are planning to build a solar geothermal greenhouse. So he had come across this company called Greenhouses in the Snow, and it's from, I think, I'm going to say Nebraska. It's a fairly cold state. Maybe I'm thinking Wisconsin. Anyways, I'm sorry, I don't remember which state, but if anybody's interested in looking it up, Greenhouses in the Snow website. So it started in the States, but they also make them for Canada now. And you can get it's a prefab kit, although you still have to do a fair bit of other stuff and, some permits and something. It's not, because it's bigger than 10 feet by 10 feet. The one we were planning to do is 66 feet by 17 feet. So it's a pretty big thing. And so there will be some permitting issues. Anyways, the problem that came up was that originally where it was supposed to go on the LaSalle Secondary site, they were in the middle of building a new elementary school on the site as well. So there's now an elementary school there as well as the high school. And in the process of that, they had all kinds of issues with the ground, and it led to there no longer being space for our greenhouse at the school. So Ray has been discussing an alternate location with some other schools, and that's still just in the works. We don't know exactly where it's going to go yet, but it is most likely going to be built at another high school, and hopefully this coming calendar year in 2023. And so, yeah, the idea in the long term is for us as an organization, not just sort of getting the grant to help them make it happen, but also to be involved in trying to create jobs for young people through the greenhouse in the future. So especially because in July and August, you know, the school will be out and the students won't be there taking care of whatever. So that will sort of cut into how they could work through the year. So the idea would be that us as an organization could employ young people in that summer period and hopefully some of these students that are involved, you know, would be interested in working. And so we can kind of create jobs, but also have them operating this greenhouse. And so with the idea that some of the food will go you know, to be donated to food programs as we do with you know, we did in the past with Fruit for All, but they could also be selling some of it in the same model as what we did with the farm last year, where these young people were learning to grow food, but also selling it in a pop-up stand. And so similar kind of model to that. So that's kind of the longer term view of it, but that's kind of neat. Just on the topic of greenhouses.
Well, that's really excellent too, because that's another project I'd love to see more of in the schools. That's exactly what I think kids should be really learning to do. Like, because that's the other thing too, is like I think schools, or at least the attitude towards schooling nowadays, is generally we want to track everyone on a university track. Like we want everyone going to university. And it might be the case that there's a lot of people that really don't need to waste their time going to university. They could learn a lot of these sort of more practical skills, and say when it comes to food production, and then even if, say, you get involved in building a greenhouse, that's not really basic skills, especially if you're talking about wiring, you're talking about insulation, you're talking about, you know, and depending on the level that you're involved in. And then you're a person with a real trade there, right? You're a carpenter, or, you know, you're a real tradesperson then. So, I mean, like, a lot of that is really good, and it also provides that community building aspect, especially if you center it around a community project. And I think it makes people feel good to work together on projects. And that was another thing I'm remembering now, that when you were talking about how much people enjoyed working and learning on these projects, and your volunteers enjoy it so much. I think it's because people have this built-in thing where we really like working together on a project, and especially big projects. Like, I kind of like thinking about the pyramids in a way, like, you know, and I mean, that depends. You can get into a whole thing about that. But I mean, you think about these big projects that we do, and we just sort of marvel at it, right? It's just sort of the sign of what human sort of working together and ingenuity can kind of do. And when you get people working together in a project that they feel good about, like it's like it multiplies that feel good, right?
Definitely. Most definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Like the way Ray kind of envisions it actually was that this would be sort of like a demonstration, like, let's do this. And maybe other schools will be like, we want that, you know, and let's try to make that happen at more schools. So, and also because a big part of like his program is called Nagansuin, it actually means leadership. And so a lot of what he's doing is focusing on building leadership skills in the students. So, you know, he kind of foresees them actually giving tours to other people of the or younger kids from different schools, et cetera, of the greenhouse, and being like, this is our thing. This is how it works. You could do this, you know. So so that all kind of fits in along the same lines as what you're saying.
Yeah, it sounds like Ray would be a pretty interesting person to talk to there. It sounds like I like that idea too of that project, and like it's a proof of concept kind of thing, right? Like you get the idea, you're bold enough to try it out, and you show people actually no, there's something really here. The kids love it; they're getting a lot out of it, a lot of practical skills, and and then that's just the inroad, because that project there you can build a lot on. You can kind of revive a lot of the sort of the technical aspects and the home ec aspects that used to be a part of what schooling was when, say, my parents went to school. Because that's the other thing. Say you want to go down the road too from your gardening thing, right? Well, you harvest the food, and food is something you eat, and generally we like cooking food, and there's a whole culinary art there, right? And that's no little feat. Like when you think about, like, say, if you're a person who handles the cooking for your family, it is, maybe we take it for granted, but it is really nice to have a nice meal to eat together as a family after you've been out working and whatever else you're doing, right? Like getting together over a nice meal is a great pleasure in life. And so that's another thing that you want to learn, and that's another essential skill.
Yeah, and actually some of the high schools do have like culinary arts programs, and some of them have specialized programs. Like at LaSalle, they do have a green industries program. And so the plan was, and hopefully would still be, to include students from that program. They're looking at things like, the technical aspects of, something that could work, that could be applied to, say, a greenhouse. That's not necessarily what they have been studying, but it's like they could apply some of what they're learning to that, for example. Yeah, I think actually, Ray would be a interesting guy for you to talk to. He knows, he's really done a lot of research into these greenhouses and stuff, and he could probably just talk about, well, and also his little operation that they have now in the classroom is pretty neat too.
Well, even just as we're talking, it just makes me think about how the schools have their playgrounds. Well, it just makes sense, to have a playground and a greenhouse. If all schools had that, like, we would be more ahead in this.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think a lot of people would like to see more garden education, more kids getting involved in gardening. Like anytime I've heard about other stuff going on in the community, the Community Garden Network does a program where they, well, it's not really the network, it's some volunteers within the Community Garden Network that have, done programs in schools where they'll start seeds with kids in classrooms and then take them out to the community garden to plant later. And, the idea being partly to, obviously to teach the kids about growing stuff, but also to sort of connect the schools with the community gardens so people know they're there and more people get involved. And so it's kind of like, win-win situation. And they just had a huge, like for a couple of years, they actually had some specific funding for it, and they were able to do lots more of that. And it's a few years back now. And they just had such, they have such a huge response to that. Like, same as I was saying earlier about teachers just, loving this kind of stuff, wanting more of it. And I feel like there's a real hunger for it, to use a pun, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. And thank you so much for coming in and talking to us more about that. I know I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it sounds like you're doing exactly what we hope someone would be out there doing. So thank you for being out there and doing what you're doing and helping to bring some of these sort of educational tools and awareness of a lot of these different things to the community and to our schools and stuff like that. So thank you for taking the time. And so if anyone would like to get involved with the projects you're involved in, or maybe be educated or something like that, how would they go about getting a hold of you or your program?
Well, we're pretty easy to find with, like, on Google. Our website will come up right away, sudburysharedharvest.ca, or on Facebook and Instagram, we're also Sudbury Shared Harvest. So pretty easy to find, and usually, that has a lot of information. There's also a sign up sheet if people sign up thing on our website if you want to get our newsletters. They're not regular. About once a month, we send a newsletter. In the summer, there's more about, if you want to come to a specific event, we're doing this specific thing, and come out and help out. And then in other times, it's, some more general news about what's going on with us, what we have planned. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys. I've been listening to some of your podcasts, and I think it's just really neat what you've been doing, and I love that you're, I don't know, it seems to be so really well received, right? Like people really, like I say, hunger for this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Carrie.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care.